So thousands of Indian students in Canada are protesting after the Canadian government has brought in restrictions that could lead to thousands of Indian students being deported. The Canadian government over the last couple of weeks and months has taken steps to curb the number of international students that are allowed to come into Canada. This is after Canadian government authorities, as well as a number of people in Canada civil society, have blamed international students for a number of social and economic problems that the country is facing. There are rising housing costs, difficulties in finding proper healthcare, difficulties in finding jobs that people are now blaming on international students. And now these restrictions by the Canadian government, which are coming after a long time where Canada and the Canadian government promised that Canada would be an open, welcoming environment for Indian students. These restrictions now seem to be backtracking on that promise, and it is something that is causing a lot of concern in India and among Indian students, given how many Indians go to study in Canada in hopes of working there and settling down there. So joining me now is Megha Rethin, who is a content creator, an artist, a performer, someone who is an Indian who has studied in Canada, to join us and tell us a little bit about what is going on in Canada and why we're seeing what we're seeing. So Megha, thanks so much for joining us. Could you tell us a little bit about why Indian students are protesting in Canada? We have heard a lot about thousands of them potentially being deported. How did all of this start exactly?
So I would say right now they were protesting for a while for different reasons. So I feel like every few months or few weeks, the reason for the protest gets a bit more complex. So the earliest I remember was maybe a year and a half ago now, that the PR, the permanent residency, which is kind of like the green card of Canada, their applications are drawn on a lottery basis. And there's like usually expected windows within which they announce the IRCC, which is the immigration service here. They announce when they're going to draw the lottery.
Right.
And I think from the beginning of COVID itself, for a while now, their lottery numbers were decreasing over time. They were drawing them less frequently and they were drawing fewer applications in general.
Right.
So that was a big thing. People were like, oh, it's COVID, they backed up applications, whatever. And then after that, there were a lot of protests about the number of working hours that international students could do, or work permit, like students after they graduate, they get the work permits because international workers could do. So they removed the limits during COVID because, like, they were like, yeah, if anybody wants to work, you can work. And then the second it cleared up, it went back down to 10 or 15 hours. I think right now, very recently, maybe a week or so ago, they said it was about 24 hours a week for part-time, and you have to work off campus for international students. So I think the most recent protests have been about restricting both the study permit, like the overall number of study permits that they're going to grant, and the method in which you can apply for your work permit. So basically, the route is usually you enter as a student, you graduate, so you need a study permit for that. You apply for a PGWP, which is your postgrad work permit. You could or couldn't get that, and that's a one-time offer that the government gives you, basically. And it could range anywhere between 1 to 3 years. And usually, if you've studied, you get the 3-year limit. And within those 3 years, you have to work full time or part time. You have to like rack up hours, and basically that adds to your total points. There's a whole like complicated system by which they calculate your points, and all of those different applicants go into a pool, and that's what the PR is for. And so it's like very long process, super selective, and like you can get rejected for like really random reasons. I've gotten my stuff rejected. My study permit was rejected once, and I got turned away at the airport once for like visa issues. It was a whole thing. So right now, I think I was like reading up about it because we have like a lot of updates in WhatsApp
Right.
university stuff, but we have it. Um, it's because apparently a lot of students and workers who are close to the expiry of their status, they leave the country and re-enter within 24 hours at the borders and try and get their applications processed at the borders. So it kind of essentially jumping the queue, but it's a separate queue. So it's technically legal, and you get to talk to a worker, and it's, I don't know, I guess people saw it as a route so have a more definite answer, but apparently it backed up the system a lot. So the people at the borders were like goods and commerce was being held up, stuff like that.
Right.
So I feel like the general consensus, especially because it's been an election year, is that they want to clamp down on immigrants in general, whether it's workers or study permits, and even if it's, workers and students who are already here, trying to clamp down on how much they can work and what kind of jobs, and like basically de-incentivizing hiring your international workers.
So you said something very interesting. You said a little bit about the fact that Canada is actually headed into elections this year, and that might be causing. So let me just cut that out. So you said something really interesting. You said something about how Canada is heading into elections, and that might be causing this reaction against international students. A lot of people, even government spokespeople, are linking problems like massive increases in housing prices, for example, in the city of Toronto, where you are now, to this influx of international students. What do you think about this argument that the Canadian government is making?
So honestly, I think they've been planting the seeds of that in like Canadian media for quite a long time. I remember seeing stories maybe like a month and a half ago, maybe even longer than that, about international students who were well off. But this is how it was being reported, I guess. Like they're well off, but they were still in lines at food banks. And the spin on the story was that, oh, they're exploiting this system for they want cheap food or free food or whatever. But a lot, like there was a huge like swell of response. They were like, no dude, a lot of international students literally do have to go to food banks because they can't afford the housing. And you'll see there are like entire pages dedicated to ridiculous Toronto listings where it's like some dude is renting out single beds in his basement for like $300 a month each. It's like so insane. And like it works because people will do it. Like it's not illegal, like people will do it. But yeah, the big housing market crisis like leaked into the clamping of study permits. So a lot, like this idea that because there's a huge influx of immigrants, that they're driving housing prices up, and housing gets built quite slowly in Toronto. And if they do, it's like these huge condos that get more expensive the longer it takes to build them. um I don't know that that's true personally. Even when I first joined, and I lived on campus for all 4 years, um there was no like indication that it was cheaper then. It was expensive even then, for not even downtown, even just way away from the center of the city. Rent was pretty intense. But I don't know when that correlation happened, to be fair. I don't know if there was some event that put a strain on Canada relations. I'm not sure. But I don't know if that's related at all to like the immigrant and housing crisis. But because of that, I think the central government basically um, told the IRCC that you have to clamp down on study permits by making sure every student you give a permit to has adequate housing within that university. So basically, that's going to lead to universities being much more selective with international students. And if they don't have appropriate housing, like for all 4 years, for all the international students you're bringing, then like they have only a set number of permits they can give out. So overall, honestly, when I was looking at it, I considered myself a little bit lucky because I felt like I got in and out of the study permit and work permit just as it was getting, it was they were doing like a little pincer move and I just escaped it.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I know even this year there's been a huge like steep drop off in the number of students applying to study in Canada. So yeah.
Right, and if I could come at you with a counterpoint, there's a lot of chatter about how Indian students are being exploited by temporary foreign worker programs. Many of them, Indian students especially, find it difficult to integrate or to speak English properly. And others, so therefore, are saying that it's actually a good thing to tighten visa laws and education laws to ensure that genuine students get through, come into Canada, and that fraud is combated. What do you think of that argument? That restrictions may actually turn out to be a good thing?
I Honestly, I have to say I kind of agree. I think a lot of Indian students come here imagining it's a bit easier than America, and it probably is, but it's difficult in its own way. I know that a lot of like Indian workers will like they will take the lower end of of the price salary range. They will, because to them it's not really about the money, it's more about the working hours. And I think it's built into the system, the way that they calculate your points on your visa. It lends itself to immigrant workers valuing the time that they spend working in the country more than the monetary value that they could generate. um and that, like, definitely with like English services being a bit more difficult, there's this, like, I mean, I don't know if it's just recent or what, but this general like anti-Indian sentiment is definitely there. A lot of why are they speaking that language here type thing,
Mm.
you know.
I understand.
Yeah, like, because there are a lot of us here. There's a lot. Like, literally yesterday I was downtown, huge group, just like downtown, playing Punjabi music loud in the downtown, and it's great. But I guess if like random people who've been in the city for like years and years, they're like grumbling about it. But I don't know. To be fair, India has always had such a cottage industry about visa and immigration and stuff, and has I know, was it Australia or New Zealand? They clamped down on like specifically Indian students because they were like, oh no, they have fake certificates for their diplomas and their graduations. So I don't know. I feel like there's a global like mistrust happening about the Indian immigration force, which I don't know. I feel like might be well earned because it's not like we don't try and explore the system, but I feel like maybe everyone does a little bit, but maybe none sufficiently. Yes.
So, Megha, you've given us all of this background. Could I ask you personally, do you sympathize with the protesting students or with the Canadian government and their arguments on the subject?
I mean, definitely more on the student side because I've been on that side, facing deportation over like technical legalities is like that pressure is like a sword. It like hangs over your head all the time. It's not like ICE is gonna come and like drag you out, but like the second you cross a border, there's a flag on your passport, you get it. And like definitely with you, there is disingenuous on the government because when they were Canada, when I was applying, it was because they had this reputation that it was a bit harder to get into the country, but quite easy to naturalize into the society because they have so many programs that are geared toward having immigrants work faster, earn faster, and get status there faster. They could like open businesses quite quickly. It's not as restrictive as it is to go to America. And it's been that way for a while. Like the reason Canada has such a huge Indian immigration population, that didn't happen in the last decade. Like it took years. There are first second generation Indian immigrants here. So I think they always knew, and say, like I'm sure the logic was the same with America as well. The West in general, at a time when it was very important and like um you know good for their economy to have these cheaper Indian immigrants work for them, they would. But my stance is always a bit more anti-government, I guess, because I know they only use it as a pawn. They're using it as a thing because like rent prices have been increasing for way longer than like there's been like a immigrant crisis or whatever. But yeah, I'm definitely more on the student side.
Right, and final question before I let you go. What do you think the Canadian government will do moving forward? You mentioned again that we're heading into elections in Canada. How do you think this is going to impact how the Canadian government looks at these policies?
I think at least for now, they're gonna try and like kind of come down with the hammer a bit, at least for the next 4 years or so, to be like, listen, we're dealing with this, we're handling this, and if housing prices don't go down after that, I'm sure they'll find something else to blame it on.
Right.
But I hope, like, my general hope is that they get more efficient with their like immigration offices because even their workers were striking. Like the immigration workers themselves were going on strike. Like a bunch of government offices were going on strike. So it's clear that it's not like just an issue that we're having with the government, but like they're having internal issues within their department as well. I don't know a lot of the nitty-gritty of it, but I would assume just having a more efficient system. I don't know what the system is now, but I don't know.
And so there we have it. Megha Rethin, a content creator, artist, someone who lives in Toronto, has been an Indian student, been through really the grind of what it means to be an Indian student, trying to stay on in Canada, going through the grind of the Canadian visa system, laying out for us just what is going on, why Indian students are so desperate, why they're protesting about what the Canadian government is looking to do, and what some of the motivations for that might possibly be. Megha, thank you so much for joining us, for explaining what has happened. And to our viewers, thank you so much for joining us on India Today Global as we track this evolving story.